The clearest sign of higher intelligence isn't the ability to find the right answers. It's the ability to recognize when your own brain might be giving you the wrong one. That skill is called metacognition, the ability to step outside your own thinking, examine it, and correct it. And once you develop it, the benefits go far beyond intelligence. It can help you make better decisions in your personal life, understand your emotional reactions, communicate more effectively, and avoid repeating the same mistakes. In your relationships, it can change the way you listen, question, and respond, making conversations deeper and your reasoning more compelling. And professionally, it can help you think more strategically, solve problems with greater clarity, learn faster, and make better decisions under pressure. But there's something even more interesting. People who develop strong metacognition often become noticeably different thinkers. They pause before reacting. They ask better questions. They catch contradictions, and they're much harder to manipulate. In this video, you'll learn how to develop metacognition, recognize the hidden biases shaping your decisions, and train your mind to observe its own thinking in real time. Because the next level of intelligence isn't simply thinking better, it's becoming capable of watching yourself think. Intelligence doesn't really stop bad decisions from happening. Most of the time, it just makes them easier to defend once they're already made. A sharp mind can build a more convincing case for the wrong conclusion than a dull one ever could, and it usually does this without a single moment of doubt along the way. So the danger was probably never a lack of intelligence to begin with. It's intelligence running with nothing above it to check the work. Something has to catch the error before it turns into a decision, and that something is a second layer sitting above intelligence. It watches, questions, corrects. When things start to drift, intelligence helps you solve problems. Metacognition helps you notice when you're solving the wrong one. It helps to see where this actually sits. Knowledge is having information. Intelligence is being able to use that information to solve problems. Critical thinking goes a step further, questioning the information itself, checking whether the reasoning behind a conclusion actually holds up. Metacognition sits one level above all of that. It doesn't question the information or the conclusion. It questions the thinking process that produced them. And if intelligence is really just the ability to think effectively, then metacognition may be the sharpest version of it there is. The ability to examine and improve the thing doing the thinking. That's the actual claim behind everything in this video. And by the end, there's a method attached to it, something you can run on your own decisions. To understand why the mind needs watching at all, it helps to know roughly how decisions get made in the first place, usually in a fraction of a second, well before any conscious reasoning shows up. In 2002, psychologist Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for research built over decades with his collaborator Amos Tversky on how people actually make judgments, not how economic theory assumed they did. That work became the backbone of his 2011 book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which introduced a distinction that's since spread into nearly every corner of psychology. System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast and automatic. It recognizes a face in a crowd, finishes a sentence before you've heard the end of it, reads a tone of voice, and reacts before the words are even fully processed. System 2 is slower. It's the part that switches on for long division, for a genuinely hard decision, or for the uncomfortable work of reconsidering something believed for years. Kahneman has said he feels more like the author of his own thoughts when they come from System 2. Most of your mental life, though, is not run by System 2. It's run by the fast one, because the fast one is efficient, and efficient is usually good enough. The problem is that System 1 works on shortcuts and pattern matching, and it hands you the answer already dressed up as certainty. It doesn't tell you when it's guessing. Notice what's actually happening here. Even System 2, the slow and deliberate one, is still just another system doing the thinking. It's a better system, but it's still operating inside the process, not above it. Metacognition is what sits above both of them. It's the act of watching System 1 and System 2 work, catching the moment System 1 hands off a guess dressed as a fact, and calling in the kind of scrutiny that actually checks it. None of this is new, by the way. Questioning your own certainty instead of trusting, it automatically goes back at least as far as a courtroom in Athens in 399 BC, where a man named Socrates was tried and sentenced to death. What got him there says more than the verdict does. Plato recorded his defense in the Apology, and buried in it is the line Socrates is remembered for above almost anything else: "I know that I know nothing." He built an entire method around that sentence, spending his life asking questions instead of handing out answers, pushing on his own assumptions and everyone else's, looking for the contradictions, sitting quietly underneath confident statements, his own included. That's already a step past ordinary intelligence. Having an answer is one thing. Interrogating the reasoning behind it, the way Socrates did constantly, is closer to critical thinking. But notice where he eventually pointed that questioning. Not just at other people's arguments, at his own certainty. He didn't trust it. He tested it in public, over and over, at real cost to himself. This is over 2,000 years old. It was never a modern productivity trick. It's one thing to know the idea is old. It's another to watch it fail inside a genuinely brilliant mind. And that's where Charles Darwin comes in. Darwin's weak spot had nothing to do with intelligence. It was memory. He describes in his autobiography what he called his golden rule. Whenever he ran into a fact or observation that cut against his own theory, he made himself write it down immediately, no exceptions. His reasoning was almost confessional. Those inconvenient facts, he said, were far more likely to slip out of his memory than the ones that flattered his ideas. He'd caught his own brain quietly deleting the evidence that made him uncomfortable while holding on to everything that made him feel right. So rather than trust himself to catch that in the moment, he built a system that did it for him for years. Owing to that habit, he wrote, very few objections were ever raised against his work that he hadn't already noticed and answered himself. He wasn't just collecting facts about finches and barnacles somewhere off the coast of South America. He was auditing his own mind, because a brilliant theory built on a biased memory is still, underneath all that brilliance, a biased theory. That's the hierarchy in action. Darwin's intelligence produced the theory. His memory, part of the same mental machinery, quietly worked against it. And it took something above both, a habit of watching his own thinking, to notice the weakness and build around it. If Darwin needed an outside check, it's worth wondering whether you actually don't. So Darwin shows that even a brilliant mind can't fully trust its own memory. What happened next in the story of science shows something a little harder to accept. That intelligence gives you no protection from fooling yourself, not even if you happen to be trained specifically to avoid it. In 1974, physicist Richard Feynman stood in front of a graduating class at Caltech and said the first principle of science is that you must not fool yourself because you are the easiest person to fool. To make the point, he told a story about measuring the charge of the electron. Physicist Robert Millikan had measured it decades earlier with his now famous oil drop experiment, and his number came out slightly wrong. As other physicists repeated the measurement in the years after, the accepted value crept toward the correct number instead of landing there right away, and Feynman explains why. When a result came in too far above Millikan's number, researchers assumed their setup was broken and went looking until they found a reason to discard it. A result close to Millikan's number got waved through with barely a second look. These weren't careless people. They weren't dishonest either. Some of the most rigorously trained scientists on the planet still trusted a number simply because it matched what they expected, and quietly distrusted the ones that didn't. It took years to correct, a small nudge at a time, all that training, all that intelligence, and none of it included a mechanism for noticing the bias while it was happening. That's the piece. Intelligence alone never supplies. Darwin trusted his memory until he built something that forced him to slow down and check it. The physicists trusted their expectations until enough years passed for reality to grind the number back into place. Neither failure came from a lack of intelligence. Which brings up the actual question worth asking. If some of the sharpest, most rigorously trained minds in scientific history could fool themselves without noticing and needed labs, peer review, and decades of hindsight just to eventually self-correct, what happens to the rest of us, making decisions every day with none of that available? That's roughly what happened to a hedge fund manager named Ray Dalio in 1982. By then, he'd already built Bridgewater Associates, a firm that would go on to become one of the largest hedge funds in the world. But that year, he was confident enough in his own economic forecast to go on television and predict a depression. He was wrong. The market went the other way. Bridgewater lost money, and Dalio has said he ended up firing almost every employee and borrowing money from his own father just to keep the firm alive. That wasn't really a failure of research, it was a failure of certainty. He'd trusted the feeling of being right as though it were evidence, and the feeling had let him down completely. What he changed afterward matters more than the failure itself. He stopped asking whether he was right and started asking something sharper instead. How do I know I'm right? Not as a one-time moment of humility after a rough year, but as a habit that stuck around. It hardened into a principle he still repeats: pain plus reflection equals progress. And at Bridgewater, it became something concrete, an internal log where employees write down their own mistakes, not to get punished, but so the company can actually study them and learn from them. What he built wasn't a way to stop being wrong. Nobody gets that. It was a loop. Make the call, notice when it breaks, figure out exactly why, correct it, feed that correction into the next decision. This is the hierarchy turned into a working habit. Intelligence made the original forecast. Metacognition is what noticed the forecast had failed, asked why, and rebuilt the system that produced it. The people who get ahead usually aren't the ones who avoid every mistake. They're the ones who catch their own mistakes faster than everyone around them before those mistakes get expensive. That loop isn't specific to hedge funds. It shows up anywhere. A decision gets made under uncertainty, which is most of life if you're being honest about it. Someone hasn't replied to a message in 6 hours. The fact is simple, no reply yet. But the mind rarely stops at the fact. It adds an interpretation on top: they're ignoring me, then an emotion, frustration, sometimes something closer to hurt, then a reaction. An angry message typed out and nearly sent before a second thought has a chance to catch up. Metacognition lives in that gap, between the fact and the interpretation, asking what's actually known here versus what the brain just quietly assumed and handed over as though it were fact. Or take someone about to launch a business strategy they already deeply believe will work. The kind of certainty that starts to feel less like an opinion and more like something obviously true. The natural instinct is to ask how to prove it's right and then go find exactly that. The better question, the one that actually protects the decision before it costs anything, is the opposite. What evidence would prove this wrong, and then actually going and looking for it, before the money and time get spent defending a conclusion that was never properly tested. Something similar happens with the way most people study or prepare for something that matters. They reread the same page, the same notes, because it feels familiar. The words go down smoothly, and nothing about the process feels difficult. That feeling of familiarity isn't the same thing as understanding, and there's a fairly blunt way to expose the gap between them. Close the notes. Try to explain the idea out loud, in plain language, with nobody around to fill in the blanks. Wherever the explanation stumbles, that's exactly what isn't understood yet. And it's a lot cheaper to find that out now than in front of an exam, or a client, or a room that won't be nearly as forgiving. There's a quieter version of this too, one that costs more and gets talked about less. Someone deciding whether to leave a job, end a relationship, move somewhere new. These decisions rarely get made purely on evidence. They get made on a feeling of rightness that shows up first, and then a search afterward for reasons that back up a conclusion the mind already reached in an instant. None of that is dishonest. Exactly. It's just system one. Again, dressed up as intuition, doing what it's built to do, which is move fast and sound confident, whether or not it happens to be right this time around. A delayed text, a business strategy, a page of notes, reread one more time, a decision about a job or a relationship, different situations on the surface. Underneath, roughly the same mistake, mistaking a feeling for evidence, catching that mistake comes down to something close to 4 steps, and they build on everything already covered. This is metacognition made practical. The hierarchy turned into something you can actually run. Start by noticing the moment certainty shows up. The instant a thought arrives, feeling obviously immediately true, because that's usually the signature of System 1 taking over without asking. The message read as an insult, before the reply's even been considered. The strategy that feels obviously right before a single number's been checked. Then question it, the way Dalio eventually learned to, out loud, if that helps. How do I know I'm right? Not a rhetorical shrug meant to sound humble, but an actual check against evidence you can point to. If the honest answer is that the evidence is thin, or that it's really just a feeling being treated like a fact, that's usually the moment to slow down, before acting, rather than after. Test it the way Feynman more or less did, by closing the notes, or stepping back from the conversation, and trying to reconstruct the idea or the argument from memory alone. The struggle that shows up during that attempt is the gap between feeling and knowing, showing itself in real time, and then update, roughly the way Darwin did. Write down whatever just contradicted the original belief before memory quietly buries it, the way it buries most inconvenient things, and actually let that evidence change the decision, instead of explaining it away in the next breath. This is the part almost everyone skips, because updating can feel like losing, like admitting the first instinct was wrong. It usually isn't losing. It separates two kinds of people. One gets sharper with every decision. The other just repeats the same mistake with a little more confidence each time. Notice, question, test, update, none of it is complicated. None of it needs a special notebook or a formal system behind it. It can run in a couple of minutes, quietly, before a message gets sent, before money gets spent on a strategy, before a belief gets repeated for another year without ever being checked against anything real. And notice what's actually happening when you run it. You're not just using your intelligence to solve the problem in front of you anymore. You're stepping above it, checking the system that produced the thought in the first place. It doesn't depend on being naturally calm or naturally self-aware either, which is probably the useful part. It's a sequence, and a sequence can be run by anyone, on purpose, even in the middle of a strong emotion. The first few times, it'll probably feel slow, a little artificial. Do it enough times and it stops feeling like a technique at all. It just becomes how a mind checks itself before acting. Roughly the way Darwin's golden rule eventually stopped being an exercise and just became how he worked. None of this was really ever about Socrates or Darwin or Feynman as individuals. Each one shows a different piece of the same basic discovery, that certainty isn't evidence, that memory isn't neutral, and that intelligence on its own was never built to notice when it's wrong. That's not a flaw specific to any of them. It's built into how thinking works generally, in every mind, including the one reading this right now. Knowledge told them what was true. Intelligence let them use it. Critical thinking let some of them question it. But metacognition, the layer above all three, is what let a handful of them catch their own thinking in the act of failing, and fix it before the failure became permanent. Being intelligent was never quite the same thing as being able to monitor your own intelligence. One solves the problem in front of you. The other checks whether it's even the right problem, then goes further still, examining and improving the very process that generates your answers in the first place. That's not just a better way to think. If intelligence is the ability to think effectively, this is close to the ceiling of it. The ability to watch the thinking itself and make it better on purpose. It doesn't take a higher IQ, it doesn't take a sharper memory than anyone else has. It takes one habit, catching your own mind in the act, starting with whatever decision feels completely, comfortably certain right now.